Welcome to Two Deep Hokies Under the Influence. This is a Sons of Saturday podcast, and it is brought to you by McCoy's Auto Repair in Radford, VA. In fact, if you're watching on YouTube, and you should be because we are live, the McCoy's Auto Repair logo is almost like in my face. It's right there. So the advertising is front and center, but you'll also notice that we have a special guest with us tonight, not just Rob, my normal co-host, but also Doug Bowman from 247 Sports and VT Scoop. Doug, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. I said when you popped in, I said it's been about 6 months to the day, just about, that you were on with us talking in June about some commitments we got then. Well, what better time to have you back than a day like today? That was one of the best for Hokies recruiting that I can remember in a long time, especially when it comes to the portal, depending on how you view those JUCO guys. But we got some key commitments today. But before we get into that and what veterans are coming back for 2024, as well as just the bowl game, we're going to get into a lot of stuff tonight. Rob, why don't you give us a cheers?
Cheers to 2024. We'll get to the bowl game a little bit later, but needless to say, bowl games have become increasingly less meaningful as opt-outs have happened and things like that. And this game has really changed course quickly in terms of anybody's expectations. So I am still excited about it, but today was awesome, and I am very, very excited for 2024, and we are going to hit on that as well. So I'm gonna cheers to what is going to be a good season next year.
Cheers, buddy. And this is probably, well, it might not be our last podcast of the year. There may be one more, but we'll just have to see about that. We got the Military Bowl coming up on the 27th. That should be fun. We may do a recap right after that, but regardless, we're not going to record again before Christmas. So Merry Christmas, happy holidays to everyone that's out there watching. We have a bunch of people that hopped in the chat. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video if you're here with us. And if you're watching on X, come on over to YouTube because you can put your comment right in there and we can add it to the screen and all the rest. So make sure if you're in here, comment, ask us any questions you have. I was actually at the women's basketball game last night, and I know the Sons of Saturday were posting a bunch of pictures and stuff, but there was a ton of Hokies there. There's probably at least 100 like in our crew, and it was loud every time Georgia or Liz were doing something. Now, Georgia had an awesome game and had some really sweet plays that were on the timeline today, but Matilda Eck, she went for 25 points and hit 7 threes in the game. Amor was 18 and 8. Kitley actually didn't have a great night, but the other people picked her up, especially from the second quarter on, and it was a really fun experience. So I just wanted to mention that off the top. I know we're going to do a lot of football tonight, but the women's basketball game and just the support that program has seen on the road and at home, it's really cool to see this year on the heels of that Final Four. Did either of you guys tune into that last night?
I did not, but I did see that game was the 500th career win for Brooks as well. So Eck really put him. I saw the 7 3-pointers and I saw the 500th career win for him. So congrats to him in the program, coming off of that Final Four from last year and putting together a good season this year.
Yeah, 500 wins. He was actually on ACC PM with Mark Packer tonight. Coach Kenny was. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, big night for him. I'm glad I was there to see it. Our pick'em winner was Some Spread in the year-long Hokie pick'em that both Rob and I were not so proficient in, but the name behind Some Spread which I think is actually a Chris Berman quote from an old like ESPN commercial. He's like, "Some spread, huh?" And like Howie Long is there. But I think that's where Mike got it. But the guy's name is Michael. He was our winner, 85 and 55 on the year, picking games on the pick'em. And these are not his favorite plays. These were just, the 25 games a week that they get, or the 10 games a week that they give us. So really well done by Michael. I'm going to send you a prize pack. Got a little trophy that's coming your way. Don't get excited. It's kind of a makeshift. I remember a couple years ago it was a White Claw can. So this year I have upgraded him to a beer, but and you could drink it if you wanted to.
He upgraded it to one of the trophies from his little league and that he found under his bed. From,
I just ripped the nameplate off. The guy's holding a soccer ball, but it's all good. But yeah, well done, Mike. Congrats. You will get your package of prizes here soon. Roster portal updates. And this is really what people want to hear about. This is why we have Doug on the show. But I'm just going to start with who we're losing to graduation. Kendricks, Pollard, and Payne, 3 key losses along the D line, which made what happened today all the more powerful for 2024. Nazir Peoples, Tisdale, Cole Beck, that era has come to an end. Matt Johnson and Justin Pollock, our long snapper. Those are who's graduating. Those are the guys who's not going to be back. We had our portal entries, which Daquan Wright, a couple weeks ago, Rob and I talked about that. Bryce Duke, Daquan Lofton, Derek Canteen, Johnny Dixon, Chance Black, and Hunter McLean was the latest guy that entered. One of our offensive linemen from a couple years back entered the portal, and he is gone. Who's coming back? And this is where the good news is coming from. These were kind of I'm going to start with the COVID year / NFL potential guys that are coming back. 2 weeks ago, we heard from APR and Fuga, and we talked a little bit about that, Rob, on College Football Monday last week. Got their recommitment videos because now every player that may come back needs to put out the recommitment video, but that was awesome to get those 2 linemen back. And then last Tuesday, we got the big announcement about the wide receivers. Jennings, Felton, Gosnell, Lane are all coming back. All 4 of those veteran wideouts are coming back. I guess Mahul is broke now. I don't know, because we had to pump some money across.
Listen, IBM just bought Octo for $1 billion. So let's say owned by Arlington Capital. So he sold to Arlington, but I think he probably had some rollover in that deal. So some of those funds may have gotten directed elsewhere.
But yes, we locked up all 4 of those wideouts. And then Thursday last week, Dorian Strong says he's coming back. Saturday, we got the one that a lot of people were waiting for, which was Bayshal Tootin. And so I don't want to diminish any one of these commitments, but the Bayshal one felt so huge for how key he was to our offense. Doug, what was your reaction just to getting some of these key pieces from last year's team, getting all of them back?
Just in general, it's pretty amazing is like the word I want to use. Like, I remember when the wide receiver video dropped, and you're just like, especially in this era, in the portal era, like it's kind of at the point where you wouldn't be surprised if people left, like, and even going, like, I think there's 7 guys we're really talking about, even going like 5 out of 7 would have been like, that's pretty good. To get all of them back was something. To get all 4 wide receivers back, I thought was notable, especially considering Jennings is one of them, which he played in 1 game this year. So he's coming back to take some people's targets, some people's snaps, some people's receptions. So to get them all on board, Gosnell signed up for a 4th year as the number 4 wide receiver, basically.
Yeah.
And so, I think it says a lot about Pry and the culture that he's built and the buy-in that he's gotten. I think it is a direct correlation from the proof of concept that we saw this year with the progress we saw on the field to get to 6 wins. I doubt it happens if Tech doesn't show that kind of progress, and kind of, you can only, when you're a new coach, you can only talk about the vision and the future and to believe in us and what we're telling you and all that stuff for so long. And especially these days, it's even shorter. So I think without the progress we saw on the field, this probably doesn't happen. So it's an indication of that. So, I mean, it's just big all the way around. I mean, both of your corners coming back, all 4 of your receivers. You mentioned Tootin. I think he's an X factor in terms of what he does, elevating that room. Yeah, I think he's head and shoulders talent-wise above the other guys in that room, and what he does for Virginia Tech's offense in terms of giving them that balance with the 4 receivers coming back, with Drones, who he's a good runner in his own right, but he's even better when he also has an option to give the ball to a guy like Tootin. So I think all around, I mean, you can't be anything but amazed by like the ability to do this. When these guys were getting appealing, certainly not direct offers. Nobody would ever directly offer to somebody on another roster, but there were appealing opportunities elsewhere, and to get the buy-in from every single one of them is pretty ridiculous.
And you alluded to the wide receiver thing, and that was the one I found the most shocking. To get all 4 back, 3 would have been great. 2 would have been kind of what I expected. I never expected to get all 4 back. And so I'm totally jacked up about that. But you're right. It does show, and maybe they don't realize it, but they probably do. These aren't dumb kids. Like, it is going to cut into your targets. We didn't have Ali Jennings last year, and he's a stud. So he is going to take receptions away. And something that Sam, me, and Rob were talking about last week was that this isn't an air raid system. If you're getting a guy back, like we're going to run the ball. That's what Pry has always said. He wants to run the ball. And so as a wide receiver, are you content taking your 40 catches and turning it into 35 or 30? And these guys, they're buying in because maybe they believe we have a chance at the championship. I'm not sure what Pry and the NIL people and all the people that deserve credit for getting these guys back were saying, but whatever they did, it worked.
And Pete, I think you hit on something. One, Tootin staying, I think, is equally as surprising. You and I talked about this all season, Pete. There is no way he did not have strong offers from some big programs to make a transfer over there. Him in one of the top echelon, top 10 teams with a really solid offensive line would be a monster. So, but what you just said, I thought was very pertinent here. It couldn't have just been the vision, because the vision is not enough to get this many of the guys to all come back. And it couldn't have just been the NIL money. So what I think is really exciting for Hokie fans here is it had to be, all of it had to kind of come together. There had to be the NIL support, the money there had to be the vision, and there had to be good team chemistry for in order to get this many guys to all come back. And that is a level of cohesion that I don't think we've seen, and I can't recall in the last 8 years, to really see the program operating where you're like, damn, they got their shit together, like, and really went after this the right way and put the vision with obviously some money and some incentive for guys to stick around. And that's cool.
Yeah. And go ahead. Go ahead, Doug.
I was just going to kind of follow up with that. I posted something on a message board yesterday thinking about along those lines. This is in a way, it's validating for Whit Babcock's decision to hire Pry, in that when that decision was made, the one knock on it was that he didn't have head coaching experience, and that kind of went opposite of what Babcock's hires to that point had been. But the like caveat with it was he doesn't have head coaching experience, but he spent 7 years at a very high major program in Penn State. They're not Ohio State. They're not Michigan. They're pretty darn close. And he was the right-hand man there for 6 or 7 years and got plenty of experience dealing. Obviously, the portal and all NIL and stuff is new and people are learning it as we go along. But I think there's something to be said about understanding what it takes to recruit and retain high-level players like a Bashal Tootin, like a Jalen Lane, like a Mansour Delane, that you just can't pick up anywhere else besides at a program like that. So I think you're seeing kind of the offshoots of that in how Pry's managed this roster and the plan that was put in place to even have a chance to retain 7 out of 7 or whatever it is.
And this is the reason that we say that Pry gets it. I know it's become a joke as time has wore on. There's some t-shirts I think you can buy that say he gets it and whatever, but he really does. And the organization, since we expanded the coaching roster, because we're up over 45 coaches or staff members, whatever you want to call it. And they seem to know their areas they're supposed to recruit. They seem to know their responsibilities. The roster management seems to be significantly better. And we're going to see some of that too, in terms of the attrition as we move into spring and whatnot. Because when we get to who we brought in, it means that we're going to be losing some guys off the roster throughout the spring as well. But he definitely gets it and understands what it takes to win at this level. Executing it and figuring out where you're making mistakes is something we've gone through the last 2 years, especially at the beginning of both years. But to their credit, they figured stuff out and the team improved both years we've had Pry. And now what's happening is some of the expectations after you bring all these guys back are going to be raised, something that he hasn't really had to deal with yet, and something we're going to talk about shortly in a few minutes. I also see another guest in our green room I'm going to bring in shortly here. You guys are going to love this one. But for right now, I just wanted to get to the underclassmen that have recommitted. We already heard about Drones. Drones announced that a couple weeks back on a radio show somewhere that he will be coming back next year. And that's one of the greatest things you can have as a quarterback that's committed to the program that you've seen improve within the program that's sticking around. Something that doesn't happen too often if you notice that there's 117 quarterbacks in the portal right now. There's 133 teams. So, and I think it's something like 80% of the starting quarterbacks are in the portal, like something absolutely ridiculous. And so to retain Drones and then to retain the other key underclassmen in Mansour Delane was absolutely clutch. He hit us with that announcement last Friday in between the Strong and the Tootin announcements. And that was also his birthday. And he had put his brother Fahim had tweeted out like big news coming tomorrow, which got everyone all like excited about Fahim and what he's doing with his recruiting process and how he's narrowing that down. Well, we're in the finals for him potentially, but more importantly, Mansour is coming back. And so you said it, Doug, we're getting both of our starting outside corners, even though we're losing Canteen. One of the reasons I think we're potentially losing Canteen is that the other two guys are coming back and that he's good enough to be a starting outside corner somewhere, and he probably wants to do that. But this sets up a really, really strong defense for us next year, a thing that you wrote about today. And I do want to get into that starting defensive lineup you kind of put into your article in a little bit. Couple more notes before we move to the commitments, because I know everyone wants to hear about the commitments. Derek Canteen is in the portal, but he is playing in the bowl game. Something important to note. He was working with the safety group because both Nazir Peoples and Jalen Stroman are recovering from surgeries and will not play in the bowl game. And one of the really cool things that happened a couple days ago is we saw Allie Jennings back at practice. Now, don't get ahead of yourselves. He's not going to be playing in this bowl game. I would say that's a 99% chance he's not playing in the bowl game. But it was really cool to see a guy who went down earlier this year with a pretty rough injury to be back at practice. And the final thing Pry had was that he expects 10 guys to enroll for spring semester. That's from high school and from portal, I believe. 10 new faces to get in there in spring, which is good when you're continuing to turn over this roster. Getting as many guys as you can in for spring is key. Let's start with the portal ads. And I'm going to add our other guests right now. We got Jonathan French from the Key Play on the show. French, how you doing, buddy?
It's been too long. Glad to be here with you guys.
That's right. It's a very exciting day, and I'm glad that you messaged me. We were chatting just a little bit about the commitments that came in, and me and you have some of these sidebars sometimes where we're like, oh, this guy coming in, I don't know, or this guy, I'm very excited about his tape or whatever. So having you on the show after a couple years here, maybe more than a couple, it's awesome. So thank you for joining us. Let's talk about Montavious Cunningham first. The offensive lineman we got last week from Georgia State. He redshirted in 2021, played in 8 games as a redshirt freshman in 22, starting 4 games. And then last year, he started all the games, full-time starter, over 700 snaps, only gave up 2 sacks, and has a really nice ranking from 247 with a .87 as a transfer. Your initial thoughts on Montavious Cunningham, French, because he comes in as a tackle, but he's only 6'3". Do you think we could move him around?
I think he's a tackle. He is a really interesting player to watch on film, has a sort of a quirky stance. You don't see a whole lot of offensive linemen that are squatting but are not putting their outside leg backwards. So it looks a little odd, and he shuffles when he moves on a lot of plays. So a lot of folks are going to watch it and go, oh, that looks awkward. And plus he's short. So maybe we'll move him inside. He has incredibly long arms and a strong upper body, good anchor. I watched a whole lot of him against LSU. And while LSU's defense isn't what it has been, and they're very passive, but he didn't look out of place. He looked completely comfortable. Not really any blown assignments or plays where he looked like he got ragdolled and the quarterback got away, so he didn't get credited with a sack. And then on plays where they run more of the Virginia Tech style zone blocking, where he was asked not to shuffle, but to actually scoop a gap, take a hard, flat inside step and get inside position, he gets there consistently. It doesn't always look pretty, but he gets there. My only worry with Cunningham is he's so reliant on getting his hands up quick on the outside shoulder of the defender that I could see him getting called for holding penalties in the ACC. But at the same time, I don't think he got called for a lot this year. So whatever he's doing, it's evading the eyes of the officials. So I'm looking for more film. It's always hard to get tape on G5 programs. There's not as much tape available online. But again, that entire LSU game, I hate watching highlights. It's much better to watch a guy every down. You'll get a much better feel for him. And in his case, he looked perfectly comfortable in that spot. Now, could they move him inside if Clements returns and is improved? Possibly. But I don't think that they brought him in not to be the right side tackle.
You think he's a natural right tackle for us.
Yeah.
And so
it's awkward looking, sort of like Blake DeChristopher was. It wasn't pretty, but he got where he needed to go.
And you expect him to come in and start next year? Say we have the same guys we had this year. Would you expect him to come in and grab that starting spot?
I was a big fan of Clements as a freshman, and at times he flashes it. I know he's had some injury issues, but from a consistency standpoint, you're looking to upgrade. He's a right tackle. I think based on the film that I've seen, I think he's consistently better than Parker Clements is today. So I think, yes, he could step into that spot. Will he? Well, that's why, you have spring and you have competition, and nothing's guaranteed. But when you just watch the tape of him, I think that they brought him in with the intention of upgrading that spot.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more upgrades inside, but that's another conversation.
That makes sense. And Doug, we were looking at a bunch of different offensive in the portal. I mean, I think we offered as many as 15 as of a couple days ago. And so do you think that Montavious Cunningham was pretty high up on that list in terms of who we were going after?
Yeah, you definitely. I was going to follow up with that, and I definitely think was brought in to upgrade the right tackle. I mean, he's literally right tackle. He played most of the season there, if not all of it. And I think that's exactly why they brought him in, was to probably take over for Clements there. You're talking about one of the early offensive linemen that they identified and went after. At this point of the portal, that's what you're looking to do. There's so much more to come in the portal in terms of offensive linemen, especially coming up after these bowl games. I think you'll see more guys enter the portal. So I think this initial kind of rush, you're pretty choosy and you're prioritizing the guys you really like. And Cunningham certainly, I think fits the bill as like a guy they identified as he can be an immediate upgrade for us at that spot.
Yeah, and you'll see the comment from Coach Holmes there. He hopped right in there on the height thing that we were just talking about, that French believes that he is a true right tackle.
He's a tackle.
Yeah, you could move him inside, but it's not all about height. It can be about how long your arms are, right? I mean, that can be a huge factor in how keeping guys away from you and your feet, right, French?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Does he initiate contact with the defensive end or the defensive tackle if he's setting to the inside? Is he initiating contact before the defensive lineman can start to initiate their move? That way, you, as an offensive lineman, you can dictate where he goes, and then you redirect either direction. And he shuffles well. He moves well. Again, it's not always pretty, but he gets where he needs to be. And you look at his arms, and he doesn't have the arms of a 6'3" guy. He may be that height. But when you have long arms and you pop and initiate contact and you can keep the defensive lineman off your body, being a little shorter, if you can do all that, is a little bit of an advantage because you have leverage. You're open and underneath the defensive lineman. The difference is most 6'3" guys don't have long enough arms to initiate that contact. I can say that as a guy who was small and short arms. I struggled mightily with that. I was trying to pop off and hit the guy before he got out of his stance. And if I didn't, I was probably whipped on the play. So he does everything really, really well. Is he going to be a dominant run blocker? Or, he's not going to be Wyatt Teller, but he does everything enough to be serviceable. And there were games this season where if the Hokies had a serviceable defensive line and a serviceable linebacking group, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that here in a second, Virginia Tech probably wins games that they lost.
Yep.
And the offensive line was a killer. And again, I'm expecting hopefully 2 more guys that are upgrades, not 2 more guys for depth, but 2 more guys who are upgrades.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears. 3 commits today. And that's something I want to talk about right now. And you just talked about the defensive line. And I'm going to let Doug start this one off because we got Aeneas Peebles from Duke, the defensive tackle. He was 3rd team all ACC this year. Talk a little bit about that process with him and maybe where else he might have gone instead of coming to the Hokies, Doug.
He was in on Louisville. I feel like Louisville is in on everyone. And from what we've heard, from what Evan has said, Evan Watkins at 24/7, he didn't want to go too far from home. He wanted to be able his family to travel. I think he has a brother coming up as well, so they got to do the Friday night game followed by the Saturday game weekend. So that was important. The other big thing with him was the relationship Derek Jones, Tech's cornerbacks coach, had with him and his family going back several years. Jones, of course, was the Duke cornerbacks coach for more than a decade, I believe, under David Cutcliffe. So there were some lingering relationships there that they took advantage of and really closed the deal. APR was involved in selling him on what's possible with them playing next to each other. So, just a big get for Virginia Tech in terms of the gaping hole that was there at defensive tackle heading into this offseason where you're losing Payne and Pollard and Kendricks. You're returning Fuga. I was talking about it earlier. You can get away with like 3.5 defensive tackles over the course of the year, but it's dangerous. They needed to get the 4 and some change probably. So with Fuga and Peebles, and then I'm sure we'll talk about Kamari Copeland, you're feeling a lot better about the defensive tackle room. I kind of compare it to what they did with the wide receiver room last year, where until they got those transfers last year, Dwan Lofton was the returning leading wide receiver. So they did a really great job of identifying, especially with Peebles, a very high level talent. He's probably a slight upgrade over Pollard, which is surprising, which I wasn't, you're not really expecting when you have that big of need in the portal. You're not really expecting to upgrade over probably your best defensive tackle. So big get. I think PFF has him as like the number 5 defensive tackle in the Power 5. I think I saw him at in terms of guys that played that level of snaps. If you told me that was who they were going to land on, that level of defensive tackle out of the portal this early, can't be anything but ecstatic about it.
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic get. It's a guy I really wanted Tech to go after and pull, because one of the things Elko did was come in and then turn that Duke roster into something desirable. And Peebles was one of the highest ones on that list. He played in 47 games in his career. And you're right. Coach Cheetah, from what I'm hearing as well, was deeply involved because of that relationship he had with the family and Duke and whatnot. French, what are your thoughts on Peebles and how he plays inside? Does he compare to any of our former tackles in terms of style?
It's difficult to say. He's a really, really interesting watch on film. The most interesting thing is with all that experience, third team All ACC, he wasn't a starter. Duke rotated 4 guys. Dwayne Carter was the number 1 guy. I think he was first team All ACC, but at most they would play 6 to 8 reps and rotate in and out. So he was on the field plenty. I would argue more than Feldarius Payne was this year. So he's a regular down guy, but he was constantly rotating in and out. He's very twitchy, very similar to Pollard in that regard. How he's better, or Doug mentioned upgrade. If he's an upgrade, it's because he can take on a double team and hold his ground a little better than Pollard did. That was always a struggle for Pollard and Mario Kendricks. They would tend to get washed out of the gaps. So his ability to, there's a play I'm doing in a film review coming up on Peebles where he eats a double team at Clemson, and it frees up both the inside linebacker and the corner to come as unblocked hats because he's eating up both linemen, and the stupid corner followed the receiver inside on a crackback, ran out of the way, and the Clemson running back goes around the edge for 20 yards. So it's like, this is a highlight, but it's going to look bad, but it's really not. So I liked Peoples a lot. I think the biggest issue with him is how many more reps can he take on from what he was doing at Duke? And he played a lot, but that gets us to what's the future? Who's the 4th defensive tackle? Can you keep his reps at a minimum where he can be effective and compete at a high level? Sort of the same theory that you're looking at in the receiver room, where you have 4 guys who are going to be pushing each other for reps, rather than guys out there sort of going half speed because they have to save their energy.
Let's talk about that potential 4th defensive tackle, because I'm looking at Kamari Copeland and his JUCO commitment to the DL from Iowa Western, but he's a Virginia Beach kid. He's from Kellam High School, 6'2", 285. So that to me, it seems like a guy who is going to play inside. I could be wrong about that, but not many defensive ends are 285 unless you're James Gale having to go on a diet for a minute there. But Copeland was a .8856 in the composite, 4th ranked recruit in the class in the composite, and the 5th ranked JUCO DL. Sometimes these JUCO guys come in though, and they are more of a project. Copeland has a YouTube channel dedicated to like his workouts and his game highlights and stuff. He's got like 5,000 subscribers on his own personal YouTube channel. I would check it out. The guy's a monster. Like, I don't think there's a lot of physical development that has to happen for him. French, do you see him being able to contribute early? Are you high on his upside?
Yes. Loved his film. Again, not being able to watch every snap, which is the challenge with judging a guy on highlights, is always challenging. But what you do see in the highlights, he's incredibly explosive, but he's not just an athletic guy who, gets off the ball and, can run down the ball. He uses every leverage move known to man. He is great with his hands. Now, he's 6'2", 285, a little undersized, but it's exactly what Tech, has used at the defensive tackle position, and Pry's defense is so similar to Bud Foster's is style-wise that, I think he fits in really well. I actually see him as the 3rd defensive tackle, and the guy you're subbing in as passing downs. I think his upside is higher than Wilfred Panay. I actually wrote some comments on the Key Play today where I would be intrigued at getting a 4th defensive tackle, moving Panay out to end, because when he played end against UVA, he looked pretty comfortable. But yeah, Copeland, what he showed in the highlight reel, explosive, refined technique. The biggest worry with him is he's going against JUCO offensive linemen. He was very rarely double teamed. When you get into tight spaces, can he play in tight spaces against contact? I think he can. The first thing I look for, especially in offensive and defensive linemen, is do those feet keep moving at contact? His do. And that right off the bat, you can do something with that guy as long as he can anchor against a double team, keep those feet chopping, and either eat up blocks or get off blocks and make plays. If there was a critique of the Hokies defensive tackle room this year, with Payne being the exception as the year moved on, there were way too many times teams were able to block the Hokies defensive tackles one-on-one and without those guys punishing the offense for doing it. They did some, but especially the games like Louisville and Florida State, you didn't see those guys getting off blocks and making plays. And you either have to be able to eat a double team and keep your linebacker clean, or if they block you one-on-one, make them sorry for it. And didn't see enough of that this year. Copeland's a guy that comes in and I think has the upside to make teams sorry for it. Now, you want to complement him with a guy who can eat those double teams if he's going to be similar to Payne. Try to put him out a little wider in a 3 or 4 technique and shooting through the gap. But he's got kind of that Corey Marshall, Woody Barron with maybe more explosiveness. Makes me just want to rub my hands together and laugh maniacally. Veterans of Twitter, the $1 million man laugh. I'm hoping I can bring Copeland out for a few sacks and pull out the $1 million man GIF in this year.
The Corey Marshall comp is interesting because Corey Marshall, I think Copeland's a little bit bigger than he is, maybe slightly, but Marshall he's taller. In those short spurts when he was healthy, Marshall was so dynamic, kind of like a Tasmanian devil type. That would be great if he turned out to be someone like him. In terms of Copeland, Doug, was this the JUCO guys are always interesting. How did this come to be in terms of, were we on him from high school? Because he went to Army, so I guess there wasn't. And the staff wasn't here when all that went down, or they might have just been getting to Blacksburg when all that went down. And he developed a little bit at Army, but more so when he got to JUCO. So, but he did pick us over a bunch of other big programs.
Yeah, NC State was in on him, which I think Charlie Wiles' stamp of approval is a pretty good one to have for the defensive line. Arkansas, Tennessee. There's one other program I'm forgetting, probably Louisville. Auburn. But he was a guy, Evan says, he was talking on our podcast that he got lost in the COVID wash. One of those high school coming out of high school, that that funky 2020, 2021 where you just guys just didn't get evaluated or didn't get the work, the conditioning in the weight room. I think he was 215, 220 at that point. He's a guy that once he got into a structured weight program and got out of the COVID era, he's whatever he's 285 or 280. So that's where he's a kind of a late bloomer in that sense. And obviously as a Virginia kid coming, or a Virginia high school kid, obviously at Iowa or in Iowa for junior college, a guy that Tech had on their radar pretty early of being one of the defensive tackles that is going to solve their big problem at defensive tackle.
Yeah, and that's something Rob and I were on all year, is that first of all, the defensive tackle play kind of waffled good and bad throughout the year. And depending on opponent, depending on scheme and everything else, we all saw it. And it wasn't a mystery that our run defense struggled. So getting these two commitments when we're losing those three guys, especially Payne, who when he played in those spots, he was huge for us down the stretch. Rob, you got to be feeling good about shoring up one of these deficiencies that we had all year, and especially in light of them departing.
Yeah, especially them departing, and I think it's a huge testament to APR and what he kind of said on that recruiting, which is, I need somebody next to me that can shore up the center so I can go on the edge, right? And do what I want to do. And I think this really opens him up, and even more so than this with Pollard and Kendricks and those guys up in the center. It was, I don't know how much of it might have been opponent's scheme, but it was so Jekyll and Hyde. There were times that Pollard was an animal getting off blocks, and it looked really good. And then other times he was nowhere to be seen for almost an entire game, 3/4 of a game, that you didn't even notice him in there. And I have to believe, and this is not a slight whatsoever against Pollard and Kendricks, that if we know what Pebbles is, and we're kind of guessing what Copeland is, but I think this has potential with APR coming back in another season under a coaching staff that he now knows, in a location that he now knows, that it could be an upgrade across the line in terms of the starters. We'll see what happens if we fill out the defensive tackles with additional depth and get to that 4 or 5 number. That would make us all a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, and I want to talk about right now the guys behind that line, because we struggled mightily in the run defense because of what was mostly behind them, and the safeties being banged up and the linebacking position kind of being different guys thrown into positions that they're not natural for. And we went out and we got Sam Brumfield to come in from Middle Tennessee State. 5'11", 226. He was the leading tackler for the Blue Raiders. 6.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 8 hurries, and 2 forced fumbles on the year. 45 solo tackles from that middle linebacker position. If you go to the 247 rankings, which we're going to do because we got Doug here, he was the 11th ranked linebacker in the portal. Out of 172 linebackers, he was number 11, or at least that's what he is right now. These things are very fluid. 0.86 transfer rating. Was in JUCO just a year before he was at Middle Tennessee State. So he's kind of leveling up and continues to level up. But this is a very big addition for us because of the lack of natural middle linebackers in our program at this time. At least that's what it seems like to me. French, what's your take on Brumfield coming in? And do you see him being able to step in and be that starting Mike for us?
Well, if he does step in and become the starting Mike, I think that is a telling story about the status of the linebacker room at the tail end of the season. I was pretty underwhelmed by Brumfield's film. I know he had a good PFF score, and I appreciate that. Didn't start out the year as a starter. Of course, his first actions against Alabama. That's coming out of JUCO. That's tough sledding right there. But he got into the game pretty early and played a good number of snaps. I thought it was interesting. Again, with G5 teams, it's harder to get film. So what film I've seen, the only flags that concern me: one, he gets taken out in nickel packages, or at least Middle Tennessee did. So he's not an every down linebacker. That doesn't mean he could be. I didn't see Pry doing a lot of pulling his linebackers on 3rd and long to replace for a nickel. He was taken out in goal line situations. Middle Tennessee State put in a different linebacker. I'm forgetting, I believe it was number 5, would come in and replace him in goal line situations. But you talk about true Mike linebacker. That he is. He will get into the right gap, and he'll fill it to the best of his ability. He has a little bit more than Alan Tisdale ability to get off a block and make a tackle in a tight space. I think the worry with Brumfield is polar opposite of what you didn't worry about with Tisdale, is that if the ball gets away and you need someone to run to the ball, Brumfield's not going to blow anybody away with shedding a block and making a play 3 gaps away type of thing. So I think he's a guy who, if there isn't growth in the position, if let's say McDonald, Lawson, they decide Lawson ends up being the will and McDonald competes for the Mike, I think that'll be an interesting competition. I think McDonald actually probably has more physical upside, but as we saw this year, none of the guys playing linebacker really were comfortable in what they needed to do at the position. We don't know anything about. Doug probably knows way better than me what kind of progress AC and Stevens, I hope I'm saying the young man's name correctly, how he's looking. There could be other options coming in, but if the room is in the state it was last year, I think he starts. If someone takes a big step forward, and that's what we hope for in player development, then he's a guy who can play if someone gets hurt, sort of a Barkel Rivers type, who may have some limited upside, but he can play the position, and you know exactly what you're going to get from him out there. At the same time, if he gets pushed around out of a gap that he fits, I mean, he's 5'11", 230, and he was JUCO and playing at MTSU, so that's sort of what you get.
Yeah, and well, there's also the hope that in an off season with a more big time program and a more astute linebackers coach and Chris Marv and Brent Pry that he could take yet another step forward.
Mhm.
But you are looking at 5'11", 226. And he's probably not built like a keg like Rayshard Ashby. You know? So there could be some physical limitations on Brumfield. Nevertheless, you talked about, some of these guys that are physical freaks in our linebackers room this past year, but they really struggled to play the position.
Yeah.
And so
you're not in your right place. It doesn't do you any good.
Right. And I love Kelly Lawson. He's literally a freak if you go to Bruce Feldman's article, but he was playing a lot on natural ability. And maybe, the head catching up with the feet, Bud Foster saying that happened to a lot of our linebackers and it just wasn't there. I think Brumfield is a key addition and someone I'm going just from a floor aspect of how bad our run defense was at times this past year. I feel better right there, right off the bat. But yes, there are probably some limitations here. Doug, Sam was being pursued by a handful of other places. Like I know he had people very interested in him, and we were going after linebackers. Where do you think Brumfield falls on our list?
I think he was one of two. He's probably I don't know if it was 1-2, 2-1, or Alex Howard was the other kid, the transfer from Youngstown State that they brought in. I think he visited the week before Brumfield did. He committed to A&M yesterday or something. So I think those were the two guys they identified early. We knew Brumfield Virginia Tech was on him pretty soon after he entered the portal. I think there's a Marv connection there. So they were on him early. Again, I think it says a lot about their preparation and their priority when they're making moves on guys at this initial stage of the transfer portal. I
think it's not just putting out any offer. It's putting out an offer and going after and not wasting time and resources on a guy you can't get. If they felt like they had a good chance and they feel like he fits the need, they're going to go and they're going to prioritize him. And I do have faith in this staff just because of what we talked about earlier and how well organized they seem to be when it comes to this portal and recruiting game, that they prioritize the right guys. And if they can get one of them, then I feel good about it. Is that your take?
It feels like that, except for offensive line. I feel just in general,
last year was a little bit weird because
the whole
changeover,
the whole offering. I feel like offensive line is every program just kind of offers the guys and then figures out if they take them later.
Fair enough.
And there's that one, I forget his name, but he visited in Tech, didn't pursue. I think he was the UTEP transfer. So there's a little bit of that where you're offering to get on the list, to get the visit, to get in the mix, and then you're kind of making your decision on which way you go later.
It's not necessarily a committable offer.
It's the same thing, but offensive line is everybody wants offensive linemen. And I mean, we saw last year with Troy Everett, he played half the year at App State and ends up at Oklahoma after considering Tech. And I think he played fewer snaps at Oklahoma this year than he did at App State, but there's so few good offensive linemen that enter the portal that you got to get in the mix to have a chance at the ones that eventually you do get comfortable being what's a take.
And I guess that's why we had 15 offers out there within a couple days.
That's the one position that's different. Right? Like linebacker was 2. Defensive tackle, there was Copeland and Peebles and maybe a couple other guys involved there, but offensive line is the one position where you just saw the offers go out.
And so we got a question on the screen now from Drew. After all of today's commitments, which position do y'all think we need to prioritize? And Robbie, I'll start with you. You see, we get these defensive linemen in. We get an offensive tackle, and we get the linebacker. What do you think we need to go after next? Is it another one of those positions like that we've already gotten, or is it a different position?
I'd still go with offensive line. That would be my give me offensive line, or I'll go with the least. I'll go with the kicker in the first round of your fantasy league. I'll go with a blocking tight end. How about that? So we can get How about a true blocking tight end?
And we are still waiting to hear about Gallo, right? I mean, there is the potential that he could come back.
I say that in jest, but we're gonna see what happens with Gallo. But I mean, that is actually it's not a critical need, but it is something that we're gonna want to fill in. But I'll stick with offensive line for me.
Doug, what would you say?
I'm looking for a safety. That feels like the last spot on the defense that needs a little help after, if you assume Jalen Stroman probably has one of the starting spots, and that leaves Jalen Jones, Mose Phillips. I threw out maybe they think about Keontae Jenkins sliding backwards from the
I really want to
position.
get Jenkins back, man. I really want to get him back.
If I could see that at least in this spring, as he's a 6th-year guy, I don't know how much more he needs to extensive reps there. And in the name of getting your best 11 players on the field, if those are your options, if Jenkins, Jones, and Phillips are the safety options at that other spot, I think it's worth a look. But if you can find a starting safety in the portal, I think you go for it when you look at the rest of the defense, and you're filling in your spot at defensive tackle. You feel good about APR and Cole Nelson, probably at defensive end. Cornerback, obviously. Stroman, if he can stay on the field. That feels like the last major question mark. Will is the other linebacker spot, but I can get behind saying Kelly Lawson's light is going to turn on, and it's all going to, given his athletic ability and his potential, and the experience he's built up over the last 2 years, I can get behind that more than Jones or Phillips being absolutely ready at safety.
Yeah, French, how about you?
Give me my carving knives. Center, right guard, right off the bat, please. I'm so tired of seeing offensive linemen coming off the snap, planting their feet and trying to hang clean defensive tackles. It never works. I've been saying it for 12 years. If the offensive lineman's feet stop at contact, there's only so far they're going to improve. So if the right guy becomes available and is interested in Virginia Tech, offer him, deal with the consequences later. I know, Caden and Braylon Moore have been here for a while, but you can recruit over them if need be. And then, of course, Bob Schick struggled, although he played pretty well against UVA, but most of the rest of the year, I think most folks would say that he and Brody Meadows were, struggling a good bit, especially with more athletic defensive tackles. That's my first priority. Again, if I knew the answers to the unknowns, ranking in priority, you could put them in a bag, and it just depends on what the coaches are seeing in practice with the current group of student athletes. But a 4th defensive tackle, ideally someone who's very similar to Fuga in terms of being able to eat up double teams. I think that would complement Copeland and put a guy inside of APR that can draw double teams and free him up in space, because frankly, APR doesn't play real well in hand-to-hand combat situations. Wouldn't mind a higher level linebacker unless, again, Stevens has taken a big step forward, or they think Gabriel Williams or one of the linebackers they're bringing in has a lot of upside, and I prefer not to play those guys as freshmen. Same with Emmett Laws. I think Emmett Laws is going to be great, but I don't want him playing as a freshman at 275 pounds. I think I'd like to see him get some time to grow a little bit. I think he can be, sort of enticing on film the way Copeland is. And I agree on the safety position without knowing, I heard nothing about Cam Fleming, a guy who I saw in person last year and thought he was pretty good. I didn't hear anything about his development this year, and he certainly wasn't a mix for playing time. I've heard folks are very enthusiastic about Cam Reddish. But again, 2 young, inexperienced guys, if you can bring in a safety who's a clear upgrade, who you don't feel that Jones, Phillips, Reddish, Fleming, I may be leaving guys out, But if you don't think one of those guys can beat him out day one of camp, then I think you look for, potential options. And if someone doesn't want to compete for that spot, then those are the folks you have the tough conversations with. With tight end, you all mentioned, I'm not as worried about that, even if Gallo doesn't come back. I think Gosnell needed to work on his blocking, but for first time out coming back from a knee injury, I thought he was pretty good.
Yeah.
Wright's catches are going to go to Jennings. I think you'll see Jennings pretty much doing what Wright was doing in terms of motioning and short and intermediate routes on passing down. So I don't think you're losing anything in the passing game there. And Gosnell was a moderately better blocker than Wright when Wright wanted to block. Wright was terrible when he didn't want to block. I'd like to see a good blocking tight end. So St. Germain underwhelmed me, and I don't think that the Wimbush kid, from what I saw of him in film in high school, I don't think he's more of a right type of player. So that might be one area, but that's not something that you go out and you make
right. Like Robbie said, the kicker in your fantasy draft, not exactly high.
If your third tight end is costing you games, you've got bigger issues.
And quickly, French, there's a question for you on the screen. How do you prefer to build an OL? Inside OL, inside out, or tackle in?
Tackles and centers. The left tackle is the hardest position to play. And it's the most coveted. So if you can get a good left tackle, you always want to fill that position. Doug may be able to talk a little bit more about, how the pursuit of Mills, Monroe Mills, I think is his name, from Texas Tech, is going. I've watched some tape on him, but he may have committed to somebody else tonight. I don't know. But he's a very natural left tackle. Isn't a great run blocker, but a very good pass blocker. Love that first. And then, guards, a lot of it depends on what scheme you're playing. I say center when you've got to take on a team that plays a four-man front, and guards when you play a team that has an odd front and you've got to scoop that nose tackle. That's the toughest block for a right guard or a left guard, and Tech was not good at it this year.
So you got a little bit of both there. You want not outside in or
out. I want 5 good offensive linemen. I miss the only good thing about 2020 is Khalil Herbert running through holes that I could throw a table through in a lot of cases. I don't think that the fan base appreciates how good that offensive line was from a run blocking perspective. Herbert was an okay running back. He's doing well in the NFL, but he wasn't Ryan Williams. If Ryan Williams has those holes, my God.
Herbert had that speed, and he was able to manipulate his body through the holes very well off one foot in the ground, which it was a perfect marriage.
Sometimes he could have gone through those holes in a wheelchair, and I think
that's true. That's true.
The left side of the offensive line that year was great, and to see where going from that to where the offensive line was 2 years later was painful. Very painful.
I have distinct memories of that NC State game. That was the first game of the year, that COVID year, where you're just dying for it. And then all of a sudden, I think it was his first run. It's like the hole opens between Darisaw and whoever the left guard was that year.
Lacitus, right?
It's Lacitus Smith, and there's nobody within 12 yards of him, and
they were really, really, really good.
What is happening?
They weren't the best pass blocking bunch, but my God, they could move bodies in the run game. And
I mean, they set the record for yards per carry for a season. I mean, Khalil did, but that they as a team did, and that was pretty spectacular. I want to ask you guys a little bit about 2024. You'll see this on the screen too. Rumor Mills is trending toward Louisville, but nothing definite. So I just wanted to put that up there real quick.
I was going to say, I'm telling you, Louisville is in on everything.
They are. They're to beat. Didn't we beat out Louisville for who was it? Was it Copeland or was it somebody else? Peebles. All right. So that's clutch. The 2024 recruiting class. We got National Signing Day coming up this week, or I should say early signing period starts Wednesday. We are now number 42 in the 247 overall ranking, which is now your high school and your transfer together, or number 42. It should be noted that we only have 19 commits, which is the third fewest of any team in the top 50. So this is a small class right now. Doug, before we get into anything else, should we expect any surprises on signing day? I'm not really expecting anything, but what do you got to say?
No, I don't think so. No negative surprises, I would say. That's
That's
what you
good.
first
That's
that's
good.
what you first want to avoid, especially on signing day. But I also don't think Tech is in on anybody. I know they were kicking around Mason Wade, the offensive lineman who was a Duke commit. I can't remember if he actually ever officially decommitted, but I don't know if
Everyone's been talking
following
about
through.
Mason Wade. Like
Yeah.
that's been a big topic of discussion. It's not maybe perhaps not trending in the direction to the Hokies.
I haven't heard anything recently. I know he got the Clemson offer, and I can't remember. I don't. Did he ever officially decommit from Duke, or was it?
Not that I'm aware.
Was
but
he just casually looking around?
someone in the chat can correct us if we're wrong, but I don't believe he decommitted.
I
But
think
anyway,
the numbers there are getting tight, at least from what Virginia Tech wants to do.
we are definitely
with the
tight
transfer
on numbers.
portal, where it's are you going? They've got 3 offensive linemen commits already. I think 3 or 4 in the portal era is about the max you want to take, because you want the flexibility to take a Cunningham or the portal guys. So
yeah, and that's the thing, is like this class is actually very small from a high school recruiting standpoint. However, if you want to go to the average ranking of the recruits in the class, we are 30th currently in average recruit ranking. So a top 30 class for Virginia Tech is pretty solid. It could be better, could be worse, but you have to keep in mind that Pry and the staff is still repairing those Virginia relationships. And over the summer, we had our little hot streak, and that was fun. We did have a decommitment from that group, but that always felt a little bit. That was the defensive tackle. I can't remember his name right now, but that kind of came out of nowhere at the time, and then he ended up decommitting. However, Gabe Williams, Keelan Adams, and getting Copeland in there, among others, Emmett Laws, Gerard Johnson. There's a lot of good guys in this class. I'm looking forward to signing day, making sure those guys sign on the dotted line. But to be 30th in average recruit ranking after a 3-win year and now just barely a 6-win year, I will take that for now, especially if you're bringing me key pieces to fill out what could be a very good 2024 season. And, you win, it leads to recruiting. You recruit, it leads to wins, all that kind of stuff, chicken or egg. That's why I want to talk to you guys about 2024 right now. Doug put out his article about the projected 2024 defense, including our new commitments. I want to talk about that in a minute, but you did a data dive article on the 5 factors to winning, which is a Bill Connolly term. Rob knows that. And then a success rate article, which was really good. If you're into numbers or you're into data at all, you need to read what Doug is putting out, because I don't miss those articles. They are fantastic. In the defense article that you put out today, you kind of projected who we'd be, and then you put out their PFF ranking and where they ranked within the ACC. I'll start with you, because this is your business here. Do you see this defense being better when it gets to the end of 2024? Do you see it being better than the 2023 defense?
At this point, I'll say yes, but not substantially. I don't think this is turning in. This was kind of a wishy-washy defense for me. You look at like the success rate numbers that put out defensively were better than I expected when I pulled them. Top 40, top 50, which tells you a little bit about like how the season went, that it was a little surprising. We know the issue with the big running plays that we saw all year was defensive tackle, linebacker related, safety related, and they're upgrading there. So I think they're upgrading, or at least adding more options there. So I think you can see it at least staying the same, if not getting a little bit better. Bringing back Strong and Tulane at cornerback gives you just a huge luxury in terms of what you can do when you have complete confidence in those corners. So I think that's a big boost. And defensively for Virginia Tech, as long as Brent Pry's the head coach, like I think you have to be pretty comfortable that they'll put out a fairly decent defensive outfit almost every year. I think this year was the first year in Brent Pry's since he went to Penn State. So since 2014, I think was the first year they finished outside the top 40 in SP Plus defense rankings. So, like, when in doubt, he's going to put out a pretty decent defense. I think Peebles helps, like everything we've talked about, and then bringing back those two corners gives you a lot of confidence going into next year.
The one thing I am also excited about is that we saw a lot from Dante Lovett. We saw a lot from a little bit from Braylon Johnson, but those are guys they really believe in going forward. And so not only do you have Strong back and you have Delane back, but you lose Canteen. If Lovett continues to improve and gets out there more, will you really take a huge step back in your defensive backfield? French, did you feel that way about some of the young corners that they played well?
Yes, I loved Lovett's high school film, and then when him and Braylon Johnson got on the field, they didn't look out of place. They weren't flying around, tipping balls and making interceptions, but they were in the right position. They weren't physically being overwhelmed on any plays like you usually see with true freshmen. I think they can step in. I think that the biggest worry is if Pry plays a sub package where you need to play one of those guys, can they play the nickel or do they need to play outside? And I think that they're probably going to see Lovett or Johnson. Johnson's probably more comfortable at the nickel, but see Lovett or Johnson playing outside, and then either Strawn or Delane slip inside to play the nickel when they play, more spread-oriented teams. And I believe I saw an article, and I feel terrible if I'm not citing the author, but it's escaping me at the moment, that said that Strawn was playing a little bit of nickel in practice in preparation for the bowl to enhance his NFL value. So that situation may present itself, that Strawn moves inside, and then a name from the past, Dante Lovett, becomes the Chris Hill figure, where Chris Hill would come in, and when they would move Kyle Fuller inside to nickel, et cetera, the 2011 season. So that kind of schema. But I like those guys. I feel much more comfortable about the long-term prognosis for corner than I do at safety or linebacker, or those other two positions.
I'm with you on that one. I also agree, just from a body type standpoint, like Lovett to me seems like an outside guy, and I could see Strong moving inside and being a great nickel. Like it's weird because even was it Kendall Fuller ended up being a great nickel in the NFL, but he played outside at Tech. Like that's one of the few body type situations that I think went the other way, but I feel like Strong could really be a good nickel if that's what they want to do. But Lovett to me seems like he should be outside. Braylon Johnson too, I think, should end up being outside as well. But I'm not an expert, so I'll leave that up to Coach Jones and what he wants to do in the back end. But guys, I want to talk about 2024 expectations and schedule right now. I'm going to get blocked out by this, but that's okay. I'm going to add the schedule for next year to the screen. And Robbie, I want to start with you. There's been some talk that we should win 8 games next year based on who we're bringing back, the stuff that we're doing in the portal. Even on some of the threads I was on today, people are saying, we must win 8 games. I don't like putting that ultimatum or that connotation on it. I would rather put it that I think this team can win 8 games. I think they could potentially win 9 games. And that's the exciting part. How do you feel going into this season in 2024 and where the expectations for the fan base should be?
With everything that's now on the table and returning, I think that's fair. I think the interesting part of looking at the schedule is the transfer portal is still moving around, so this could change pretty materially. But the quarterback situation in the ACC in particular is changing pretty dramatically. And I think that is, if you're going to look at 2 things that dictate whether or not Virginia Tech is going to put together an 8-win season next year, I think it's, do any of the schools on here that we don't expect to pick up anybody major pull a rabbit out of their hat, is number 1. And then 2 is the linebacker play for Virginia Tech, which it was befuddling with the talent that we have. And, Pete, you and I talked about it, was like, do we have a coaching problem? What the hell is going on here? Because we have guys like Lawson that looked lost a lot of the time. So in my mind, 8 wins is achievable on this when you have, a school like Georgia Tech potentially bringing back, one of the best quarterbacks that we're anticipated to face as it stands today.
Yeah, that is a great point in that when you go through the schedule and you're thinking about who you're going to play, well, Marshall, the quarterback we faced last year, is not going to be there next year. And you could go through a number of these teams. And even when you start the year out, like UVA, we did our previews over the summer, Rob, and it's like, oh, well, Tony Muskett is this or this. It's like, we didn't face Tony Muskett. We faced a kid that we didn't know that he was even going to be on the field. So projecting it out is difficult. However, you see the 3, you see the 6 wins this year, and you get all these guys coming back. Doug, you expect to improve upon that win total next year, right? And do you expect that improvement to be, you look down the schedule, I know it's not in order. The first few games are actually in order, but after that, this is from FBS schedules and they're not scheduled yet. Do you expect us to move to that 8-win plateau next year?
Yes, I think so. I think at this point, I'm definitely more comfortable with that after all the returns in the early editions. If you look at Tech's SP Plus rating right now, they're number 50 in the country. There's 3 teams on the schedule that are currently ahead of Virginia Tech, Clemson, Miami, and Duke. And I don't think any of us expect Duke to be as good.
No.
So just based off that, you're looking at, I think 8 wins is probably pretty solid as a baseline for next year. In terms of looking at the schedule, that's a juicy 4-0 start you're staring at.
It potentially, yes, and that is the thing.
And then Stanford, not the best team coming into the ACC, and then like you guys talked about, the uncertainty at quarterback the rest of the way. Duke might bring in Malik Murphy from Texas. I don't know if that's done, but it sounded.
What do you think about Kyle McCord heading over to Syracuse?
McCord to Syracuse is interesting. I don't know.
Robbie,
that they have
Robbie
the
watched a
talent
lot of
around
them this
him.
year. Yes.
Yeah, I did.
I know Ohio State fans were fine with him not being their quarterback anymore.
They were very fine with
but
that.
Doug, he was a 5-star or whatever.
Yeah. And I don't know.
Well, the thing about McCord, which is funny, is that he threw 24 touchdowns, but that's it. He didn't rush for any touchdowns. He had an incredible receiving core. I know that some of the guys were banged up. But he has 2 first-round picks in that receiving core, and he threw for 24 touchdowns and nothing else. I think Schrader was like 1 shy of that touchdown total. So my whole thing with that is like, if he throws 24 touchdowns with Marvin Harrison Jr. or it might have been 28, but whatever. If that's the amount you throw with one of the best receiving cores in college football, you go to Syracuse. What's the top line you could expect to throw? It's a new coach. We don't know their style. That Fran Brown could come in and start tossing the football all over the place. But my expectation is, however good McCord looked this past year, it's going to take a big step back with the talent around him under a new coach at Syracuse. But French, your expectations for next year.
Well, you guys have known me long enough to know that every team scares the hell out of me until Tech is up on the scoreboard. So I'll throw a couple comments out. One, regarding Kyle McCord at Syracuse. Hey, Keldon Slovis was a 5-star too. And you go behind that offensive line, he's not as athletic as Schrader. Depending on what kind of changes Brown makes, and he's a hell of a recruiter. Syracuse probably would have to be on my comfortable wins list, except it's in that damn dome.
I don't like that place.
Yeah,
I don't like that place at all.
The only good thing about Syracuse is I met Don Mattingly there last year, and that's the end of that. Couple of other notes: Rutgers, Marshall, and Old Dominion. Marshall and Rutgers both ran zone read offense with almost no semblance of a passing game. Linebackers couldn't fit it, and that's why Tech lost those games. So that is dependent, even though Tech is most definitely a more talented team. Marshall, their strategy to crash off the ends messed up Tech's offense, and then Rutgers kind of sat back and Tech put up yards. But if you're preventing the big play, can the defense hold up? Those games are a little stickier than I think we want to admit until we see those upgrades, till we get answers for those questions. And then Old Dominion, for all their struggles today and throughout the season, and Tech beating them, in about as handily a fashion as you can get in a game that close. What they did offensively did give Tech some troubles with the run game as well. So those three are sticky. The other games on the schedule, I think it's interesting. There's not a real dominant run team on the schedule.
No.
I don't know. Go ahead.
Is Managai from Rutgers just announced? Is he coming back to Rutgers? I just saw something like 2 days ago. But that would be the only team in terms of like just being a power running team that would scare me. You look at these other teams, and you're right, French. Like I'm not. Who's Clemson going to have? They will run the ball well because they're Clemson, but it's not something that people are fearing over the last couple of years. Although I did think they were better when they played the guy behind Shipley. Like I felt like he was a more natural fit for what they were trying to do later in the season. But yeah, and listen, that was a little fun exercise. Predicting wins and losses at this stage in the game is very difficult because you don't know what these teams are going out and doing in the portal for the most part.
Exactly. With what we knew now, if they don't get to 8 wins, it's going to be very disappointing for the folks who have really stepped up to the plate from a fundraising perspective, from a recruiting perspective. So now that you've got the Joes, you got to get them in the right place, and that's the challenge for the coaching staff.
Absolutely. And guys, I appreciate you indulging me with a little bit of that, because one of the biggest articles that always hits on ESPN.com right after the draft is like the way too early draft or the way too early top 25 for next year. That's kind of what we did with just predicting the schedule for 2024, because it's just a ludicrous exercise. But I do think, like French said, the fan base wants 8 wins. I mean, we all want more wins, but the idea is now like we better win 8. And I don't love that, but I agree with it. Like I think we should be leveling up, and to bring this momentum that we have right now, so much of recruiting, so much of the way your fan base donates and feels about the program is all about momentum. And I'm hoping to continue that when we get to the Military Bowl. Before we go over some of that, I want to just talk about our sponsor, and then I'll give a chance for Doug and French to bounce if they want to bounce. But the Two Deep Hokies Under the Influence podcast is brought to you by McCoy's Auto Repair in Radford. Who doesn't love supporting a local family-owned and operating business? You know I do. I know French and Doug do too. They were established in 1980. They offer full service, including major and minor repairs. They do oil changes, state inspections. They sell tires. They can rebuild your transmission. They can do just about anything. So head to McCoy's Auto Repair this winter for all of your vehicle maintenance needs. They can even pick you up and drop you off if you can't get to the shop from work, which is clutch. So give them a call. The number is right on the screen, 540-639-2933. And you can also find them on Facebook. It's a very easy find. Just type McCoy's Auto right into the search bar. It'll pop up. Thank you, McCoy's, for being a sponsor for us for this season. We're about to turn over into 2024, but you are definitely the most legitimate sponsor this podcast has ever had, so we appreciate it. And just like that old Hokie buddy of yours, McCoy's is a name you can trust. Are you guys good? Do you want to hang out for a little bit while we talk a little Tulane? You can leave if you want to, but I do really appreciate you being here with us.
I'm good to hang out.
All right, cool. All right. We will move to the Military Bowl. Wednesday, December 27th, 2 p.m. on ESPN. There has been a lot of Tulane turnover on their roster and in their coaching staff. Willie Fritz, hired away by Houston. He had been at Tulane since 2016. He went 54-47, was a very good coach for them. But along with him goes the defensive coordinator, the wide receiver coach, the DB coach. So their offensive coordinator, Slade Nagel, is their interim coach for this game. I was trying to figure out the last couple weeks who's even going to coach this team. It's going to be Slade Nagel. This season they went 11-2. They were a very good team. They were trying to get into that New Year's Six. I was hoping they would beat out Liberty to be that team, but unfortunately they fell in the ACC title game to SMU, future ACC member SMU. And Tulane was ranked 9 weeks this year. Rob, what did you see from their schedule that, like, was there much on the schedule that impressed you?
Not particularly. And I would have to look and you had kind of the letdown at the end of the year when SMU I'm going to be very blunt here. It's hard to even look at what they did this season, given what's left in terms of a coaching staff and in terms of the quarterback. It almost doesn't. It matters for their defense because I think most of the defense is going to be relatively, I think, intact from a player standpoint. But I couldn't figure out who's going to be their quarterback in this game. So you had Pratt transferred. Yes. This isn't a joke. So Pratt transferred.
Pratt decided he's going to prep for the Senior Bowl. I think he's going.
Sorry, he's prep going to the. Then you have 2 injuries, and there's somebody else that I think is also transferring. So are they at their 5th string quarterback?
Well, it is hard to figure out. What they said in the release was that Kai Horton or Matt Abita is going to start the game. However, Horton's in the portal, and so I. Obviously, you can still play in your bowl if you're in the portal, depending on your coach.
Yep.
And in this case, Tulane needs to take anyone that would be willing to play in the game. So I think it'll probably be Horton.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but if we want to talk about their offense, because you're right, I could say they beat Memphis. I could say they beat UTSA, which those are probably the 2 best ones. It doesn't matter. This team is so different. Pratt's not there. We did see Horton when they played Ole Miss and when they played Southern Miss earlier in the year. But French, did you like know about any of that? Did you see that, like, he didn't play that well in those games?
He's an interesting character. He actually has some qualities that probably will stand out on film a little better than Pratt, the starter who's departing. A little better arm, but he turned the ball over in those games. And against Ole Miss, Tulane was very, very competitive, and a lot of that is because of two factors. McCoy White, their running back, is a horse.
Hughes.
I'm sorry, Mekhi Hughes.
I got you. Yeah.
Mekhi Hughes is a horse. He is a really good running back. I don't think he has the get to the edge speed of Tootin, but he has that natural running back. If you've got a hole where there's 2 yards there, he'll get 4. He's always squeezing forward, falling forward. Great leg drive. I loved him on film, and he's the only running back on the roster that really had a substantial number of carries. I think Pratt had the second most carries for their offense.
That's true.
And 2, defensively, they do some really weird stuff. They're aggressive as hell. I think a couple of them are in the portal, but I believe they had 6 or 7 guys that had over 4 sacks. And their leading sack guy was 7.5 sacks. He's number 6. His name's escaping me, but he's like 280 pounds. So they have a very big defensive line. They bring pressure from all over, and their secondary will absolutely knock you stiff. They're not always the best cover guys, but they will put you on the ground and painfully. So although one of those Kentrell Webb, who was a backup safety but played a lot,
and that's the thing.
He's in the portal too. So
and Doug, do you know? I'm looking at the guys in the portal, and we talked about Pratt, we talked about Horton, Chris Brazzell, their wide receiver, who was their leading receiver, 44 receptions, 711 yards, and the tight end Bowman. Like, those guys are in the portal too. You move to defense, it's DJ Douglas, it's a couple other safeties. Devin Deal, their star defensive end. I think that's what French was talking about. Keith Cooper, Corey Platt. Do you have any insight on, like, how many of those portal guys are playing? Like, because I've been doing a little bit of research trying to figure out, like, is like Brazzell's not playing, I don't believe. No. And Deal I don't think is playing. But I'm not sure.
I haven't seen anything like that. other than that, like Robbie was saying, he's in the portal, but now he's the starting quarterback.
potentially, because the other guy hasn't played at all. So if it's not Horton,
Yeah,
we don't know what we're going to see from Abita.
this is kind of like Tech situation in 2021 going to the Pinstripe Bowl.
Yep.
Tulane is a better program and in a much better shape as a program than Virginia Tech was at that time. But like Taj Bullock played quarterback in that game once it was way out of hand. But like it was a bare bones operation. And
Yes.
I can't even remember what the coaching staff was like at that point for Tech, but it's kind of the same thing. There's an article came out last week too that some of the Tulane coaches that were supposed to stick around for the bowl game got asked to actually not stick around after a little bit. I presume because they were recruiting players on the roster to their new. I think they're joining Fritz at Houston.
Exactly.
That's
That's exactly what it was.
I mean, it sounds like it's been complete chaos at Tulane from the quarterback who, he waited until was it yesterday to announce he's entering the portal right before they started, I guess, military bowl practice. But everybody knew that decision was like up in the air for weeks. So I don't know. If
I've been waiting for the practice decision. And then finally I just thought, oh, well, it's so close now.
Like, yeah, he's probably
going to be playing. And then he announces he's not. And so you would expect the coaches knew that. But based on all that stuff you just talked about, I don't know. Yeah, and so I'm thinking most of these guys that are in the portal are probably not playing unless they've had a conversation with the new coach or the interim coach or whatever. But we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But I will say the line has moved to the last I saw, it was 10.5. Virginia Tech is now favored on the line. But just from a scheme standpoint, if this team was at full strength, if Tulane was at full strength, Rob, I think this is would have been a terrible matchup for us because they defend the run really well.
Yeah, their defense would have been very tough. They were second in the nation with 25 turnovers. They had like a +7 turnover margin.
They had 17 interceptions this year.
Yeah, it was yes. If we want to play the hypothetical world of if this team had stayed intact and the coaches were still there, this would be a really tough matchup because of their defense and for that matter, their offense. As French said, they have a great running back. Pratt was good. Brazil was really good. They're all gone except for the running back. And I never ever do this, but like this is a game that Virginia Tech should win by like 21 points. If you think that Virginia Tech's going to win 8 games, if you're a believer that Virginia Tech's going to win 8 or 9 games next year, then there's nobody left. They took the analysts, or like there's analysts that are gone that are already in Houston.
And that's the thing that's really hard to factor in is that turnover at that coaching position and how that affects the rooms. We can't say. However, even if you were to take off all of the important players that are in the portal right now, including the safeties and Devin Deal and the quarterbacks and Brazil, this team is an 85-man team that was very good this year. They played at a very high level in the AAC. Now, I think if they were in the ACC, their record, even the ACC, the lowly ACC that can't get into the CFP, their record would not have been 11-2. However, I still think this is like their linebacker play, French. It's pretty solid. I feel like is it Grubbs and Machado? Jesus Machado.
Yep.
That's fitting for Christmas time.
Number 99 playing middle linebacker.
He had 98 total tackles this year. I mean, and a handful of tackles for loss, an interception in his own right. Grubbs was second on the team in tackles. I worry about if we're just talking about like, I know what Rob is saying about we should win the game handily, but like my Virginia Tech fear brain is that these linebackers are going to get after our run game. We're going to have a little problem moving the ball early on, and hopefully Bowen can open it up later because I do think the pass could be effective. Doug, do you have any commentary on that?
Yeah, I have the same like same deep worry that I think you have, where like this is a really good team that is more than just Pratt and the wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
And they've, especially over the last 3 years, I think 2 years, they're 24-3. Like they know how to win. There's a lot more winning than just the guys that have entered the portal that has built up there. I'm still kind of leaning with Robbie, where like so much is left, where it's like hard to believe that they'll be able to compete. They remind me, in an ideal world, if everybody was playing, they're like a little Louisville light-ish in terms of
Yeah, I agree with that.
Pretty good quarterback. He may even be better than Plummer. Really good running back.
Better.
Productive wide receiver. Tech struggled this year against teams that have a good running back that take care of the football and offense, and against defenses that have a good run defense and make plays in the backfield. And that's ideal Tulane. That's what they do. So initially I was like, this isn't the right matchup for like what Virginia Tech has had success against UVA and Syracuse and Wake and Pitt and all those teams. Now though, like, are they going to be one-dimensional where Tech can load up on the running back and dare this quarterback to beat Dorian Strong and Mansour Tulane? The one area I think you guys zeroed in on was the turnover margin and what they did. Tech drones in particular did a pretty darn good job taking care of the football. On the interception numbers, I thought there were some questionable throws that he got lucky that didn't juice those numbers a little more.
There's no doubt about that.
So there are all those like tips
yes.
and stuff in some of those games that luckily fell to the ground, but I think Tulane's defense probably translates still a little bit, and ours could give Tech some trouble. The offense at this point, I don't think you can have any confidence in Tulane's offense competing with where Tech's offense is, unless the turnover position swings it.
They were not scoring at a super high clip, even with everyone in there. And French, I wanted to ask you about big defensive tackle Patrick Jenkins. Do you think he provides a challenge for our offensive line in addition to those running backs, linebackers?
Yeah, AAC Player of the Year, 300-pounder, can move. He's good. You mentioned Deal leaving, and talk about a kick in the butt. I wrote up I was working on my film review and had Deal in like 3 or 4 highlights, and then he announced he was going in the portal the next day. But interestingly enough, his backup had more sacks than him.
Really?
So,
okay.
Yeah, Tulane plays a really weird defense where they line up in an odd front, like 3-4. But then they flex one linebacker up like a defensive end, but he's standing up. And they call it the dog, but that's Deal. And I think it's Darius Hodge is the name of his.
Hodges. Yep.
Yeah. And so Deal was a little more effective at, zone blitz stuff where he would drop off into the flat and into coverage. And then rush. Hodge is a little more one-dimensional. But I don't see the big personnel drop-off on defense, except maybe the safety position. But if you can protect if you can protect Kyron Drones, you'll maybe get some opportunities downfield. But again, they're defensively, the antithesis of Rutgers. They're going to keep you scoring a few points, but they're going to do it being hyperactive, aggressive around the line of scrimmage. And then their DBs are just trying to keep everything in front of them and hit you. That's pretty much their defensive strategy. Offense is more of a crapshoot because of the quarterback position. I don't think Brazel's a big loss. He's tall, but they were looking more to Bowman, who's also in the portal, and Yule Keith Brown was a guy who kind of jumped out to me. I think he had 2 or 3 catches in the ACC championship game, but he was the guy they were looking to stretch the field. They don't throw the ball vertically a lot. I think Doug's comparison to Louisville is really appropriate. They're going to run the ball. They try to throw underneath. The biggest difference is I don't think that they protected Pratt as well as Louisville protected their quarterback. So there's an opportunity with the pass rush to get after whoever it is, whether it's Horton or the 5th string guy down the street. I think they have an opportunity to get after the quarterback, and that may end up being that difference in the game. I think 10.5, if I was a gambling man, would scare the bejesus out of me. I'm not saying it's going to be Virginia Tech Rutgers in the bowl game 2012 level ugly, but I think it's going to be a pretty low scoring game unless Tulane just completely comes in with no plan and it just isn't prepared to play. And I'm hopeful Tech is prepared to play, but with so many, especially seniors on the defensive line, they're not going to get the number of reps in bowl practice that they would get during a regular build-up week. So you never know. With this bowl that really doesn't mean a whole lot of anything except it's a good time and an opportunity to compete. You always worry about those guys who it's their last game and they're not putting a whole lot of importance on it and how they're going to respond. Luckily, Tulane's offensive line is okay. It's Hughes is the problem. So if you can, win some battles up front and contain Hughes, I think Tech's well positioned. But I don't think it's going to be it's not going to be as fun a watch as I think some folks who watched the UVA game and got really, really giddy think it's going to be.
No, and bowl games are impossible to predict. But I do agree with you on their offensive line. They run block very well. Very few tackles for loss on the year, but 70th in sacks allowed per game. And Horton, in his 2 games that he played and started, he took 7 sacks combined. So there will be opportunities to bring the quarterback down in the backfield. And if we could get a lead, any kind of lead, I think that would spell disaster for Tulane because they want to run the football. And if we could shut that down at all, like we can take this game. Rob, did you have any final thoughts on the matchup in general? Did you like a key to the game or just echoing what we were already saying?
No. I will see what happens. I don't see how you get a team of. I don't think you're going to have 7 guys that take NIL money. They waive off big school offers and come back to Virginia Tech and then mail in a bowl game. So that's just my guess. This goes back to where I said it wasn't just the NIL money. It wasn't just the coaching staff and building the vision. It was kind of all of it coming together. And in that part of that is also, I think the players have to come together. Like those 4 wide receivers have to be cool with the fact that there's now 4 wide receivers that are, like we said, taking snaps next year. That takes a level of one, either this is the start of the tryout or who's going to be the starting, wide receivers next year. This is where you're going to start to kind of peg those numbers, knowing now that Jennings is coming back in particular. So they could come out and play flat, and that could be possible. It would be counter to, I guess, what they just did, because if you really didn't want to come out and punch somebody in the nose in a game like this, then the smarter move would have been to change jobs, and you always get paid more by changing jobs than you do for staying at the same job. And you should have changed jobs. Like Tootin would have made more money going to a different school than whatever he got paid here. That's absolutely true. I mean, that's what you're seeing with the NIL moves that are happening now. That's why so many people are transferring. Like there's somebody else, you are always going to be valued more changing jobs than you are going to be getting a raise at your own. And that's what's happening in the business mind of it. So, that's what I'm banking on, is those guys want to come out and kind of set a tone for what next year could look like. And that's maybe why they came back,
especially
to improve their stock too.
To improve their stock, to show what they're going to be made of for next year and all that. And you're right, the cohesion of our coaching staff, the momentum that we've built, and bringing all these guys back, running it back for 2024, as they say, you can't come out flat. You better come out and you better kick some butt against a shell of a Tulane staff, if nothing else. You could say team. I don't know exactly who's going to be playing for the team, but I think a lot of those portal guys will not be playing. Even our portal guys, a lot of them are playing. Like, I know Daquan Wright isn't, but like Canteen is, because that's the kind of, this is what Clemson, remember when Clemson brought back Travis Etienne, and it was like, why are you coming back to school? It's one, he got a bag of money, I'm sure. But for another, like, he could have got a bag of money in the NFL. He decided to come back, and like, there is something to be said for whatever that coaching staff is selling, and that momentum, and that that team first mentality, that should play out on the field. It should. And we should go out in a game where we have fan support. This isn't going to be an empty stadium. It's going to be full of Hokies, and freaking put the beat down. That's what we should do.
I'm also here for it to go the opposite way, because it'll make an awesome off season. If it goes really poorly, that is
Come on, we don't want that.
It will be hilarious because the fans will lose their minds. Eight wins will suddenly have turned into 3 overnight if we fall flat in this game.
Yeah. 2 points. Number one, it's not the guys returning I worry about. We've named some of them: Kendricks, Pollard, Peoples, Payne, who may have an opportunity to find a spot at the next level with his quickness and twitch. When you're playing a team that's inside zone run like Tulane is, and you got to stop the running back, you're wondering about the number of reps and the conditioning and stuff of your interior guys, and your middle or your Mike linebacker is a little worrisome. So, that's more the senioritis thing. I worry about those guys. I don't, and those are all guys who came from the Fuente culture, which we found out, wasn't exactly the most stable culture in the background, and didn't have the most positive attitude about playing in meaningless bowl games. So again, I'm scared. Every team scares me, and this was a good team on film, even with what they took away. And I'll tell you, if you want to feel good during that game, if Tech does hit a couple of plays early over the top, and I think they'll take some shots to try to loosen up the defense, if they can take those shots and make plays, and I'm looking at Daquan Felton getting a 50-50 ball and winning it, so I hope Drones can put one close. Their corners are a little small. Maybe try back shoulder for the first time all year, because they play a lot of deep shell. But if you can hit a couple of those shots off the bat, you're going to feel much, much better. If the whole game's played within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, it's going to be East Carolina, Boston College in the Dredge days kind of misery walk kind of game. Rutgers against Tech in the bowl game, that kind of just, they may end up winning, but it's just pure hell to watch.
Yeah, I don't think we're setting up for that. I do think Drones he'll have every chance in the world to have a strong game, whether it's running or throwing. I know this secondary for Tulane has some playmakers, has some guys that have put up stats. Keep this in mind. Tulane was passed on in terms of pass attempts, like 8th most in the country. So those guys had more opportunities to get passes defended, to get interceptions, because they weren't that great. And they were getting passed on a lot. And they didn't even face, other than maybe Jackson Dart, it wasn't a murderer's row of quarterbacks in the AAC that they were facing. So I think Drones is poised to have a nice day against this team.
My counterpoint, and I apologize, I forget his name, but the quarterback for SMU was a backup, I think, making his first start, and he torched their butts.
Exactly.
He was good. I was watching that game going, man, I'm glad we're not playing SMU, because I know that was a rumored matchup. And I started watching SMU. I'm like, where did Rhett Lashley learn to do all this stuff? He sure didn't do it at Miami. My goodness.
Yeah, their recent games, they played well against UTSA, but Tulane was not strong down the stretch, and I think they can be had. And so I feel good about the bowl game. It's a little bit of an unknown, as we've all kind of beat into the ground at this point, but it's a game I feel good about. Let's go out. Let's continue the offseason momentum. We're going to sign off in a minute. I just want to talk about a couple of bowl games, and then we'll close things out. The ACC games. We got Syracuse against USF in the Boca Raton Bowl. There's some other fun, no one cares about that. GT against UCF, Gasparilla Bowl, Troy and Duke. Troy over a touchdown favorite because of what Duke's dealing with. UNC and WVU. I actually think that is very interesting. Both teams we very much dislike, but WVU 6.5 point favorites in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Louisville and Louisville and USC. USC 7.5 point underdogs. Did you guys see that their backup quarterback just hit the portal? The stud. Does that mean Caleb's coming back? What's going on?
Means Lincoln Riley's a fraud, just like Lane Kiffin was before him, but that's a different conversation. Fraud.
Oh my God. I love it, French. I love
Cliff
it.
Kingsbury with a better haircut. What?
He'd had a little bit more success getting some Heisman Trophy winners.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of
I
good
think
at
that
it.
actually means they brought in like Will Howard. They're in the mix for all the top quarterbacks.
could be.
So I think
yes.
the writing is on the wall for that. Malachi
Yeah, you
Nelson,
have
I
my
think, is
fun.
his name.
Yeah.
That he's not their guy right now for next year.
There's some other big lines. So our line is pretty big, 10.5, right? Well, SMU is favored by 11 over Boston College, which is every bit deserved. Like that's a hilarious matchup. That's the Fenway Bowl. So BC will more or less be playing a home game, but 11-point favorites is that that
Are
SMU
they going to be
team.
playing a home game?
Yeah,
Because
well, the same amount of people in the crowd might be there for that.
that's right. Yeah.
And then Miami and Rutgers. Ew, what a nasty one. That is that's the Pinstripe Bowl this year. I think they select Rutgers about every other year for that bowl because it's New York's one true team. But Miami is favored by one against Rutgers, and I have no
So
clue
here's a
how-
question.
Yeah.
Who wants to be there less? Miami, Rutgers, or
Miami.
FSU, Georgia?
Oh.
Of those 4 teams, who wants to be?
Well, that's
in
funny
the-
because that's the other big line. Georgia is 14-point favorites right now in that FSU game. I know that one of Florida State's players, their key players, popped into the portal, but that's huge. Like that's really big. Do you actually think that Georgia's going to cover that? Anyone can answer.
I could see
I
it.
don't. I think this. Yeah, I think this. I think the spread is that way because what they're banking on is nobody giving a shit about that game, and then Georgia just like running the ball all over, Florida State. They're also banking on the fact that when nobody cares about a game, the SEC team's going to care about it more than FSU, who just got washed out of a playoff. I think that's probably why the line's that way.
It's so hard to gauge the motivation for both of these teams. Like in Florida State, Rob, you and I talked about it. Like if you go out and you win this game and you finish the season undefeated, like that makes a huge statement. They should have motivation for the game. However, all those guys have to feel so slighted. After a month, will they feel differently to go out and play really hard? That's probably why the line is.
I think there's
where it
also a
I think
substantial
Florida
difference
State's
in the quarterback play there from
Yeah.
Georgia kid Carson Beck to versus Rodemaker, I guess. They're running out there. You got
that's the issue is the quarterback play. Florida State's got all the motivation, but you've got a bunch of 5-stars that probably live up to the hype and have had experience and win. So unless they're completely checked out, Florida State, what they did this year is amazing because you look at their recruit rankings, they hammered the portal and did great. But the guys are on the roster, are 3- and 4-star guys. They really developed well and then addressed key holes, and Tech's following the same model. But talent-wise, I think Georgia is ahead. That said, Florida State deserved to get in. Don't get me started on my 16 team.
I'm with you.
Piece,
I think Robbie and I both agree with you on that. Florida State got screwed, but the depth wise, I think is what you're saying with Georgia and just the high end talent. Like it is significant, and we're seeing that play out in the
if
spread.
Georgia shows up and wants to play, Georgia should win the game handily. If Georgia shows up with absolutely no interest in being there, and Florida State has got a real burr up their ass about playing, it could be interesting. But then the quarterback play becomes. That becomes the piece. Can Florida State get over the top? It's a little worrisome. But I think Florida State's going to be competitive as hell in that game.
I think they're going to fight. I agree. So the last 2 games we'll talk about, and we'll just close it out. NC State against K-State. I actually think the Pop-Tarts Bowl could be very fun. I liked NC State. That game sucked when we played them. We didn't defend them well at all. Thought a lot of mistakes were made. However, the NC State offense found a little something, and they got a little creative, and it got fun with KC playing for them. And K-State's been a good team for a couple of years now, and I think just it being the Pop-Tarts Bowl, that's weird. That could be fun. And then Clemson and Kentucky. Kentucky 4-point underdogs to Clemson. I think that's right. I think the matchup suits Clemson. Does the Clemson stock continue to rise, Rob? Do you think they can pull off that win?
Yeah, because it's Kentucky, I think that they'll. Yes, I think they can pull off that win. I'm much more excited for the NC State K-State game. Quite frankly, between those two games, that game for whatever reason is what the bowl season is kind of all about. Like that is a good matchup between two teams that I think will be really kind of fun, really
Evenly
fun.
matched teams.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys have any final comments on bowl season or anything in general before we get out of here?
The last thing I thought about was just going back to that Boston College home game reference. Do you have the kickoff time on that game?
I don't. I don't have it written down.
11 a.m.
That's awesome.
It's
That's
going to
so
be an
ridiculous.
incredible game.
Hey, we're going to play this in Fenway, and to really take advantage of the atmosphere, we're going to have a kick at 11 a.m.
Bowl games in the North, that's a no-no. Bowl games in a baseball stadium, also a no-no. So we got two, and then and it's in Boston, the farthest north you can basically go. I feel like, why do we have so many of these Northeast bowl games?
Now, unless they get like a ton of snow, then it could be fun. Then I'm tuning in. Like if we get like that slosh game, like the Notre Dame like slosh, which was rain, not snow. But if we get something like that, then I'm all in. That would be awesome.
True. The Army Navy in the snow is cool. Or that bowl game that Miami played out in El Paso that it snowed that one time.
Yeah.
That was fun. But you're right. Like, weird. That's just weird.
I disagree with you on bowl games in baseball stadiums.
You think it's good?
I'm all in on the weirdness, and I think for bowl season for one game, it absolutely leans into it.
Okay.
I also love weird start times, which 11 a.m. definitely fits. Tech's 2 p.m. Wednesday afternoon start time is really weird.
Are you guys either of you guys going to the game?
No. I'll be in Southwest Virginia, so.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I got some family things to work around. It's the Wednesday at 2 p.m. Like it
yeah, if they'd been in Charlotte, I would have gone.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what a lot of people have said. Annapolis is close, and like I said, stadium's not as big as Charlotte, but we've sold out our allotment already, and I think there's only like a handful of tickets even left. So it'll be tons of Hokies. It'll be a home field advantage type atmosphere for us. And I have enjoyed my previous trips to the Military Bowl. So I'm hoping to get down there, but thank you guys so much for being
Doug, one last point, Doug, if we're going to do baseball stadiums, can we do them in the southern part of the United States, not in northeast baseball stadiums? That's really the problem.
More southern bowl games, more.
Right.
Like I know there was a lot, but basically we need to reduce the number of bowl games anyway. That can be a topic for another day. But like, can we go to Tampa? Can we go to Orlando? Like I don't like. It's cold in Annapolis in December.
Honestly, I know the Bahamas Bowl was in Charlotte this year, but why don't we do lots of bowl games in the Bahamas? Why just one?
The Caribbean.
Let's
get after
week
it.
Of games. And,
let's get some diplomats involved. Let's have a Cuba game. Let's just
as the resident old guy on the phone, you talk about games in the South and baseball stadiums. I'm old enough to remember the Peach Bowl being played at Fulton County.
Oh, really? Wow. That's awesome.
Back in my day, before
oh man. Well, before French yells at Cloud, we will call it a day on this one. French, thank you. The key play. Make sure you're checking out all of his film reviews. He does a tremendous job. I assume you have your bowl stuff coming up. Is it out yet?
Yeah, it should be. It's in the editing room and should be out shortly, unless anybody drops in the portal and we have to make more changes.
And Doug, like I said, you put out your data deep dives. You had your things on the way tech improved this year. I really love that article, the one about all the missed tackles and the yards after catch and everything. Make sure you're checking out Doug's stuff on 247, subscribing to 247, subscribing to the Key Players Club, and subscribing to Two Deep on your Apple podcast feed. And until next time, go Hokies.